So I'm now between you and lunch. It's not a good place to be, so I'm not going to need 20 minutes. I'm going to tell you 3 quick stories, and then we're going to have something to eat. How's that sound? You guys have been listening for far too long. And it's been wonderful to hear from Mira and from Dawn, so thank you very much. 3 stories. So the first is about a neighbour. And I tell you these stories, by the way, just to give context here, I tell you these stories because essentially what we're interested in is how do you create a community? That's what we're interested in. I think you need a village not just to raise a child, I think you need a village for most things that matter in life. So we're interested in the village problem rather than any other particular problem. That's why I think, in the UK they should have appointed a minister for community, not a minister for loneliness. You got it wrong. In fact, a minister for city walks would have been more effective than a minister for loneliness, but that's another day's conversation. At least we'd have been entertained then. So 3 quick stories about growing community in a world that is really mistaking glamour for true beauty, a world that thinks aging is a problem to be fixed as opposed to a joy to be embraced, and a world that is more likely to be watching an episode of Neighbours or Friends than making friends with their neighbours. So, and that's the world we have to work within, rather than looking back with rose-tinted glasses trying to recover what's gone. The one thing we have to accept, I believe, is that we must foreclose on the past and accept the world as it is right now, but also work hard to create the world as we would hope it to be from that place. So the first story is a story of my neighbour who walked past my garden wall when I was outside mowing the lawn, and she said to me, "Who are you?" And I kind of said, "Well, you know who I am, I'm Cormac." And she said, "I don't." So at this stage I kind of had this panic moment, you have when you're 6 and you're called to the principal's office, even though you didn't do anything, you still feel guilty. So I thought, I felt like a robber in my own garden, but she clearly didn't remember who I was. So she kept on walking up the road, looking back every couple of minutes, and I was like, honestly, I live here. But she kept going. She went up to the shop to get whatever she was getting. And I said it to my wife. I said, "Mary just passed and she didn't recognize me." And my wife says, "Well, you're always on the road, it's not surprising." I hardly recognized you most of the time myself. And she kind of joked, but being the wiser of the two in our union, she said, "Bring the kids out to the garden with you, and when Mary comes back, she'll recognize you." Kind of looked at her and said, and then I thought about, I get what she's saying here, that memory is a social thing. It's not something that just goes on inside your cranium. So sure enough, I did what I was told, brought the kids out, and when Mary passed, she said individually, "Hi, I have 5 children," so she had a lot of greeting to do, but she greeted the kids, some older than others obviously, and then she looked at me and said, "Oh, you're back?" I said, "I am. I'm going again in a few minutes." And it really reminded me that there's 3 ways of thinking about remembering. There's the remembering that Mary is trying to do, and some features of her days is that comes easy sometimes and not so others, so that's one aspect of remembering. The other aspect of remembering is my challenge and my children's challenge to remember that we have forgotten so much that is important about how to live well, not just with dementia, but to live well, full stop. Mary married her husband in 1955 in a time when it was most likely that each evening children like mine would be playing in the streets as opposed to on play dates or behind screens. When she walked to the shop, she would have had 1 million memory ramps constantly calling her into community and into relationship and making it easier for her to face the challenge of remembering. So her memory, our memory is community. And I think the third feature of remembering is the challenge of actually reconnecting, remembering our communities. Our communities have become so atomized and so disconnected. So I think that challenge of actually gathering again, finding a way of hiving up, of grouping up, of connecting is absolutely essential. Not just, I think, around dementia, but around well-being, full stop. You know, we all live with dementia, just some of us don't know it yet, right? So we all know that life, I addressed the UK Dementia Conference, and my opening comment was, life's a terminal condition. We're all going to die, you know. And one of the lovely, I think, refreshing things about what we heard this morning is, let's stop trying to fix that, and let's start engaging with it, and finding joyful ways to actually live well in our communities. And so for me, the recovery question is not just a recovery of the person, but a recovery of community again. In all kinds of ways, I think that is our challenge. Recently, I lost a friend, Judith Snow, and she was a very well-known Canadian activist in the disability movement. And she died at 65, she died in 2015. And Judith, at the age of 6 months, lost all movement in her body, excepting for her ability to move this thumb, and she could speak. And she spent 33 years of her life, as she would say, incarcerated in a residential home. No offense to anybody who runs residential homes, that's not my intent in sharing this. But for her, it really was, it was very limiting. And she felt that she had so much more to offer. So the reason that she was frustrated about being in a residential home was because she felt she had gifts to give. And in her mind and her way of looking at things in the world, she believed that the great tragedy in life is not to have your needs met. That's painful. But the great tragedy is in having gifts to give and not having those gifts received. It's often said a gift is not a gift until it's given. It's also true to say that a gift is not a gift until it's received. So at around about the age of 34, Judith broke out of the residential home with the help of a circle of friends. It's like, think of the dirty dozen, you know. And she began to live independently. But she also found that was extraordinarily lonely. And so what she learned in her journey is that this is not a challenge about independent living so much as interdependent living. And really this is important. If we're trying to find solutions, if solutions is the right word, or maybe playful ways to live well with dementia, and we're trying to ensure that we reduce the level of institutionalization, the only way to do it is increase the level of interdependence. It's like a clutch and an accelerator in the car. As you reduce our dependence on institutions and programs and salaried strangers, you absolutely have to increase interdependence with near neighbours. So one of the great challenges I think that Scotland faces is in nearly all of its legislation, it is talking about the importance of resilient communities, but investing hardly anything in it. And I would challenge the Scottish Government with all this beautiful legislation to actually start ponying up and put its money where its mouth is. This cannot be the horse that everybody talks about but nobody actually backs and invests. If we're serious about building community, whether it's for dementia or it's for the kids that we all love, grandchildren or our own children, whatever it is across the life course, whatever it is you care about, community is essential. And I believe that over the last 40 years, we have neglected to invest in it. Mary is living proof of that. Mary, my neighbour who I started with. So is Judith. But what Judith managed to do was she managed to convince the Canadian government to give her money instead of services. And she got 120,000 Canadian dollars in 1988. And she invested that in having a life, not a service. In fact, I interviewed her a few years later and I said, how much of the money did you use to buy the services that were previously provided for you? She said, not a red nickel, and she had a twinkle in her eye. And she said, for the professionals in the room, it strikes me, and I say this with love in my heart, but one of the ways that I often measure whether what I'm doing is having impact is I ask myself the question, if the person that I'm providing the service to had my salary, would they use the money to buy the service I'm offering them? And 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. So I think another feature, and something to really think about, is how do we make sure that people who are living with dementia as a feature of their lives have, as well as interdependence, have choice and control. You know, I can't have the foggiest clue what a human being needs until they've got enough resource to be able to invest in making sure they get what they need. So I'm not saying money is the solution here, but it's really, really important that we think seriously about ensuring that people have choice and control around how they live well and how they can have a life of their own choosing rather than a life of our prescribing. And so my final story, and I probably am going a little bit over here, but I'll stop on this, is a story about John McKnight, the 86-year-old colleague of mine who started this thing called asset-based community development. And it's a story about an evening of poker playing. So John is a member of a poker group called the Old Geezers. And so I was the youngest member of this particular association on a given night. And as we were playing poker, it really struck me. The first thing that hit me was that the poker game started with an organ recital. So one guy would talk about how bad his eyes were, and another his heart. But after the organ recital, these guys started playing poker. And what really struck me was that with every single card they put on the table, and with every piece of banter, they were getting better together. They were remembering each other into well-being. You see, the truth is that happiness doesn't necessarily come from within. It comes from between. We get better and we stay better together. So this afternoon, I hope you'll join me for an hour and a half as we muse on how we might do that in a neighborhood as opposed to inside our brains. Thank you.